Okay, this is your lecture about policy and programs that we have to try to combat poverty. This is one of the longest lasting problems that we in the United States, as well as many other societies, have. Life of poverty that starts off with a lack of education. If you don't have a good education, it limits your job opportunities. So you end up taking whatever jobs you can get. Typically that leads to low income, living in poorer neighborhoods because that's where you can afford to live. Lower income neighborhoods have a lower tax base, so they don't have particularly well funded schools, which results in poor education for the next generation of kids that are growing up in those neighborhoods. Poverty is just the condition of inadequate money to buy things that we are considered desirable or necessary. Now, there is certainly a debate about what is absolutely necessary. I do want to speak for a moment about the book talks about culture of poverty. Idea, briefly stated, behind culture of poverty is that poor people have bought into this idea of, well, I'm going to be poor anyway, so I'm just going to enjoy my life as much as I can and not really fight back against it. And it says that the value systems amongst the poor, they don't value education, they don't value marriage, they don't value hard work, and those things contribute to them being poor. Now, just look on the surface, of course, those things, if you really had those values, would contribute to the person being poor. However, if we really look at poor people and the way that they live, a lot of them work very, very hard. A lot of them do value education. They may not educate themselves particularly well, but they will go out of their way to try to provide a good education for their own children. This largely shuts down, if you think about it intellectually, the idea of culture of poverty. What I think it makes more sense is a situational adaptation. And basically, this is just the idea that people survive in the situation that they're in. And so that they will make decisions that seem appropriate to them based on the number of options that they believe that they have. There are three types of poverty. Transitional poverty is what many people experience. Poverty is temporary and brief, usually brought on by a life change or misfortune. You think about the first time you move away from your parents. If you don't have your parents giving you any money, you are probably going to be poorer than you were when you were living at home. Okay? Marginal poverty is this longer lasting, people who have jobs and they are working, but their jobs are not very high paying, so it's hard for them to save up money to deal with any sort of misfortune. They may be dependent on overtime or something like that. And then you have residual poverty, people that are living below the poverty line for extended period of times. They do not have enough money to pay for their medical expenses. This can be intergenerational, though that is largely exaggerated in many people's talk. There is a difference between income and wealth. Income is the amount of money you have coming in. It's the amount of money you earn. Wealth is the total value of all the monies that you have access to, goods, investments, and things like that. Income is not a real determinant of how your lifestyle will run over multiple years, okay? You can have high levels of income, but if you have high levels of expenses, it really doesn't benefit you. You can have low levels of income, but if you have high levels of wealth, that is much more beneficial to you, okay? Now, women are much more likely to live in poverty than men for a number of different reasons. They make less money. They often have higher, society assumes that they are going to be the caretakers for children and things like that. Many times, if women are single parents, any money that they get as child support is likely not enough to really support the child, so they are taking on a much larger than 50% burden in that way, okay? A lot of times women are lured sort of towards jobs that pay less money because, the schedule will work for you being a good mom and things like that, things like teachers or daycare workers and things like that. And this leads to the idea of feminization of poverty, that there are many more things that happen in life that lead to women being poor rather than men. The book will talk about social class and things like that, and you've heard about those things for multiple years and way back to high school economics. And so there's no need for me to really cover that. I do want to point out that while I and most Americans believe that everybody has a chance to succeed, is foolish to think that everybody has the same chance to succeed. Okay? Not everybody has the same opportunities. All right? They just don't. You think about, in a very simple example, if you have an IQ of 70 versus an IQ of 140, school's going to be different for you. Same thing with life. If you grew up in a home where you had two parents there and you weren't struggling for money, and if something really bad happens, mom and dad can come and help you, that's different. You have a better chance for being successful than people who didn't grow up in that same way. Okay? Not everybody has the same chances of being successful. Some people, we all have different advantages and disadvantages. Okay? Now, some of the times we'll try to explain poverty. Some folks will look to individual factors. Must be something wrong with this person, and that's why they can't ever get out of poverty. Maybe they have a wrong attitude about work. They're not motivated. They don't try, or something like that. It's possible. People that don't try, there are some. Quite likely they will be poor. Maybe they lack human capital. They don't have the skills or the education or even the connections. Don't downplay the idea of knowing the right people whenever it comes to this. You think most of you have probably looked for a job already sometime in your life. Most of you also have a friend who found a job because their dad was this person and they worked for their mom or dad. Okay? Were they more qualified than you for that particular job? Probably not, but they had a better connection than you did. Okay? Another individual factor that is largely exaggerated is the idea that poor people have more children and they can't afford all the children they have. The average difference between number of children from a family living below the poverty line versus a family living above the poverty line is less than 1/3 of a person. Okay, this is really not a real statistic. It is a stereotype that people use against people living in poverty. Poverty affects more than just how much money do you have in the bank. It affects your health care, your education. You think a lot of you, wherever you're going to school was how much it was going to cost. It probably did contribute to that decision. Okay, housing. If you don't have some buffer of cash, housing can be a very difficult thing. And owning a home is the primary way that people can improve their amount of wealth over the course of their lifetime. How you interact with the criminal justice system is also largely dependent upon your income level. Okay? If you get accused of a crime, you can be accused of a crime and be innocent. Okay? But even if you're innocent, you have to pay for the lawyer. If you come from or have a little bit more access to cash, that is going to be much, much easier than someone who doesn't. And I realize the criminal justice majors will tell you that, well, the court will provide a lawyer for you. They sure will. But if you think that that lawyer is going to work as hard for you as someone who you are paying thousands of dollars, human nature would tell you that that is wrong, that assumption is wrong. And there are a lot of social programs to help all of us. We talked about it briefly before: Social Security, disability benefits, things like that. Unemployment, helps all workers regardless of income level. Workers' compensation if you're hurt on the job, or Medicare, which is medical assistance for our aging population. We also have a number of programs to help the needy, okay, or the poor, okay. This used to be, whenever I was a child, it was called AFDC. It was Aid to Families with Dependent Children. In 1996, the government reworked the program, and it became the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, largely referred to as TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, with the emphasis on temporary. Goals of the program to assist needy families, reduce dependence, prevent out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and encourage formation of two-parent families. You'll see, ending poverty was not even a goal of this program, never has been. Some of the requirements of TANF, there are hard time limits. The idea that you could live off of TANF money for 10 years is false. Okay? Every state has individual time limits. Texas is 2 years. That's the longest that you can receive cash assistance through the main program that people think of as welfare. There are work requirements, and child care requirements can cause some problems with this. If a person is a single parent and has children, getting child care so that you can work can be a problem. Or transportation to and from work. If you don't have reliable transportation, harder to work. But it is required that you work. So this is not an easy program to exist on. Okay? The TANF benefits will vary by state, and they do support that traditional two-parent structure. They are also, job training is supposed to be a big part of this program, or at least initially. In today's world, job training uses less than 2% of the budget for this program. So logic would tell you that increasing job training would be beneficial, because if we can increase job training, we could increase the income of people long term rather than short term. But it's hard to devote much money to that particular section of the program if we know that we're going to be cutting back on other areas of immediate need. Negative stereotypes about people who receive public assistance, that it's largely minorities, which is untrue. 60% of all people that receive welfare are Caucasian. Welfare, the idea that we spend a ton of money on welfare. Welfare actually is less than 1/100th of the budget of the military. Okay? And that they have huge families. We already addressed that. There are some other types of assistance, housing assistance, or the Lone Star card, which is part of the food stamp program, things like that. Now, different groups will look at poverty differently. Most of the time, the people on the liberal side will feel that if social inequity is not only just morally wrong, but it can cause a great disruption. A lot of times you've had revolts historically because of differing perspectives on income, or people thought that money was not being handled fairly. That's why the United States was formed initially. It was about money. Conservatives will point to the fact that the wealthy should be made more wealthy because they can use their wealth to create jobs and support education and other things. And many wealthy people do both of these things. Both of these perspectives can be and are, to some degree, true. And that's the end of this particular lecture.